Priscilla was just 22 years old, bright, beautiful, and full of life. She had dreams that stretched beyond the small town where she grew up, dreams of becoming a teacher, dreams of making her family proud. But behind her gentle smile, behind the laughter she shared with friends, there was a pain too heavy to imagine, a secret that lived in the shadows of her heart, a secret that began when she was just 8 years old. The man who raised her, the man who tucked her in at night, the man she called her hero, would become the reason she lost everything: her innocence, her trust, her voice. This is Priscilla's story, and it's not just a story about abuse. It's a story about survival, courage, and the strength it takes to speak when the world has taught you to stay silent. Before we continue, please subscribe and share this story, because stories like this can give courage to someone suffering in silence. Someone out there needs to hear that they're not alone, that it wasn't their fault, that healing is possible. Priscilla grew up in a small neighborhood in Ohio, where everyone knew everyone, where the streets smelled like fresh-cut grass in the summer and pumpkin spice in the fall. Her parents, Emma and David, were loving, hard-working people who believed in family dinners and Sunday church. But when Priscilla was only 7 years old, tragedy struck. Her parents were driving home from a wedding anniversary dinner when a drunk driver ran a red light. They died on impact. Just like that, Priscilla's world collapsed. She remembered standing at their funeral in a black dress that was too big for her, holding her grandmother's hand, not fully understanding that Mommy and Daddy weren't coming back. After the funeral, Priscilla moved in with her grandfather, Thomas. Thomas was a tall man with silver hair and kind eyes, the kind of man who told stories about his days in the Navy, who made pancakes every Saturday morning, who called her his little sunshine. He lived in a quiet house at the end of Maple Street, with a porch swing and a garden full of roses. To the neighbors, Thomas was a pillar of the community, a man who had lost his daughter but opened his home to raise his granddaughter. To Priscilla, he was everything. He was the only family she had left. He became her father, her protector, her world. She loved him with all her heart. She trusted him completely, and that trust, that pure, innocent love, would become the very thing he destroyed. For the first year, life seemed almost normal again. Thomas took Priscilla to school every morning, helped her with homework, made sure she brushed her teeth before bed. He even signed her up for soccer, something her dad used to love. Priscilla started to smile again. She started to feel safe, but then slowly, things began to change. It started with the way he looked at her. At first, she thought she was imagining it. She'd be brushing her hair in the bathroom, and she'd catch him standing in the doorway, watching her. She'd be changing into her pajamas, and the door would crack open just slightly. He'd say he was just checking on her, making sure she was okay. But something about it felt wrong. Something about it made her stomach twist. Then there were the hugs. They lasted too long. His hands would linger on her back, slide down lower than they should. She'd pull away, confused, uncomfortable, but he'd just smile and say, "What's wrong, sunshine? I'm just showing you I love you." Priscilla didn't know what to say. She was only 8 years old. She didn't have the words to explain what she was feeling. She didn't know that what was happening had a name. She just knew that something inside her felt broken, and she didn't understand why. One night, Thomas came into her room after she'd gone to bed. He sat on the edge of her mattress, the springs creaking under his weight. He smelled like cologne and something else, something bitter. He told her he wanted to talk. He told her that she was growing up, that she was becoming so beautiful, just like her mother. His hand reached out and touched her hair, twirling a strand between his fingers. Priscilla's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to say something, to ask him to leave, but the words wouldn't come. He leaned closer, his breath warm against her cheek, and whispered, "You trust me, don't you, sunshine?" She nodded because she didn't know what else to do, because he was her grandfather, because he was all she had. And that night, everything changed. That night, Thomas crossed a line that should never be crossed. He touched her in ways that made her feel sick, in ways that made her want to disappear. He told her it was their secret, that she couldn't tell anyone, that no one would believe her anyway. He told her that if she said anything, she'd be taken away, put in foster care, separated from everything she knew. He told her that this was what families did, that this was how grandfathers showed love, and Priscilla, small and scared and alone, believed him. From that night on, her life would never be the same again. Before I continue, I want to speak to you from the heart. Sharing stories like this, stories that expose real abuse and raise awareness, takes a lot of work and resources. It's not just about storytelling. We spend hours researching, verifying facts, and using different tools to make sure every story is told truthfully and respectfully. Sometimes we don't post for days or even weeks, not because there aren't stories to tell, but because we're managing limited resources. It takes strength, time, and finances to keep this mission going. If you believe in what we're doing, if you think we're doing something good by bringing these hidden stories to light, you can support us by sending gifts or any little token of appreciation. Your support helps us continue this work and tell stories that give victims like Priscilla a voice. Thank you for standing with us, because awareness saves lives. After that night, Priscilla became a shadow of herself. The laughter in her voice faded, the light in her eyes dimmed. She stopped playing soccer. She stopped talking to her friends. At school, she'd sit in the back of the classroom, staring out the window, wishing she could fly away. Her teacher, Mrs. Henderson, noticed the change. She asked Priscilla if everything was okay at home. Priscilla nodded and forced a smile, the same smile she'd practiced in the mirror 100 times. "I'm fine," she said. But she wasn't fine. She was drowning, and no one could see it. The abuse continued. Night after night, week after week. Sometimes it happened in her bedroom. Sometimes it happened in the basement, where Thomas said they could have more privacy. Sometimes it happened in the car, when he'd pick her up from school and take a detour down a quiet road. Priscilla learned to leave her body during those moments. She'd stare at a spot on the ceiling, or count the tiles on the floor, or imagine herself somewhere far away, somewhere safe. She learned to be silent, to swallow her screams, to bury her tears. She learned to survive. As Priscilla grew older, the abuse didn't stop. If anything, it got worse. By the time she was 12, Thomas had convinced her that she was responsible, that she had somehow caused this, that she was just as guilty as he was. He'd tell her, "You could have stopped it if you really wanted to, but you didn't. So that means you wanted it too." Those words haunted her. They echoed in her mind every single day, turning her into her own worst enemy. She started to believe that maybe he was right. Maybe she was dirty. Maybe she was broken. Maybe she deserved this. She stopped looking at herself in the mirror. She started wearing oversized clothes, trying to hide her body, trying to make herself invisible. She stopped eating. She started cutting herself, tiny lines on her thighs where no one could see, just to feel something other than numbness. At school, her grades dropped. She had no friends. She spent lunch in the library, alone, reading books about girls who escaped to magical worlds, wishing she could escape too. One day, a school counselor called her into the office. Her name was Ms. Parker, and she had kind eyes and a soft voice. She asked Priscilla if there was anything she wanted to talk about, anything at all. Priscilla's throat tightened. For a split second, she thought about telling the truth. She thought about opening her mouth and letting the words spill out, the words she'd kept locked inside for so long. But then she remembered Thomas's voice. "No one will believe you. They'll think you're lying. They'll take you away." She shook her head. "I'm fine," she said again. And Ms. Parker, with a concerned but helpless look, let her go. By the time Priscilla turned 16, she had learned how to pretend. She wore makeup to cover the dark circles under her eyes. She laughed at jokes she didn't find funny. She went to prom, wore a blue dress, smiled for pictures. But inside, she was screaming. The abuse continued. Thomas had become bolder, more possessive. He'd tell her that she belonged to him, that no boy would ever love her the way he did, that she was damaged goods. He controlled everything, her phone, her schedule, her freedom. If she tried to go out with friends, he'd guilt her into staying home. If she tried to talk to a boy, he'd accuse her of being a terrible granddaughter. He had her trapped. And the worst part was, she didn't know how to escape. She didn't know that what was happening to her was wrong. She didn't know that there were people who could help. She didn't know that she had a voice. She had been silent for so long that she'd forgotten how to speak. One night, when she was 17, Priscilla sat on her bedroom floor with a bottle of pills in her hand. She thought about swallowing them all, about ending the pain, about finally being free. She thought about her parents, about whether they'd be disappointed in her or whether they'd understand. She sat there for hours, tears streaming down her face, the pills rattling in the bottle. But something inside her, some tiny spark that hadn't been extinguished, whispered, "Not yet. Not like this." She put the pills back in the drawer. She didn't know why. She just knew that she wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Priscilla graduated high school, barely. She applied to a community college, more as an escape than anything else. Thomas didn't want her to go. He said she needed to stay home, that he was getting older, that he needed her. But for the first time in her life, Priscilla said no. It wasn't loud. It wasn't defiant. It was quiet, shaky, but it was a no. She enrolled in classes. She started working part-time at a coffee shop. She met people who didn't know her story, people who smiled at her without pity, people who treated her like she was normal. And slowly, very slowly, she started to remember what it felt like to be human again. But the abuse didn't stop. Thomas still found ways to control her, to hurt her. He'd show up at her work, unannounced, watching her through the window. He'd call her 20 times a day, demanding to know where she was, who she was with. And at night, when she came home, he'd be waiting. One night, after a particularly brutal encounter, Priscilla locked herself in the bathroom and sobbed until her chest ached. She looked at herself in the mirror, really looked at herself, and she didn't recognize the girl staring back. She was 22 years old, but she felt ancient. She felt hollow. She felt like she was disappearing. And in that moment, something inside her snapped. She couldn't do this anymore. She couldn't keep living like this. She couldn't keep pretending. She didn't know how, but she knew she had to find her voice. She had to speak. Even if no one believed her, even if it destroyed her, she had to try. The next day, Priscilla went to class like usual, but she couldn't focus. Her professor was talking about psychology, about trauma, about how the mind protects itself by burying painful memories, and something clicked. Priscilla realized that she wasn't crazy. She wasn't broken. She was surviving. After class, she stayed behind. Her professor, Dr. Whitman, was a woman in her 50s with graying hair and a calm presence. Priscilla approached her, her hands trembling. "Can I talk to you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Whitman looked up, concern flickering across her face. "Of course, sit down." Priscilla sat, and for the first time in 14 years, she opened her mouth and let the truth come out. It wasn't easy. The words got stuck in her throat. She stuttered, she cried, she apologized over and over again. But Dr. Whitman didn't interrupt. She just listened. She didn't judge. She didn't doubt. She believed her. When Priscilla finally finished, Dr. Whitman reached across the desk and held her hand. "Priscilla," she said gently, "what happened to you was not your fault. Do you hear me? It was not your fault." Priscilla had heard those words before, in books, in movies, but this was the first time she actually felt them, and she broke down, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. Dr. Whitman stayed with her, holding her hand until the tears slowed. Then she said, "We need to get you help, real help. Are you ready for that?" Priscilla nodded. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if she was strong enough, but she knew she couldn't go back. Not anymore. Dr. Whitman connected Priscilla with a counselor who specialized in trauma and abuse. Her name was Angela, and she was kind but direct. She didn't sugarcoat anything. She told Priscilla that healing would be hard, that it would take time, that there would be days when she'd want to give up. But she also told her that she was brave, that she was strong, that she deserved to be free. Angela helped Priscilla understand that what Thomas had done to her was a crime. It wasn't love, it wasn't discipline, it was abuse, and it needed to be reported. Priscilla was terrified. She didn't want to go to the police. She didn't want to face Thomas. She didn't want to tear her family apart. But Angela reminded her, "You're not tearing anything apart. He did that, not you." So with Angela by her side, Priscilla walked into the police station. Her hands were shaking, her voice was barely audible, but she told her story. She told them everything. The detective who took her statement was a woman named Officer Martinez. She had seen cases like this before, too many of them. She looked Priscilla in the eye and said, "I believe you, and we're going to do everything we can to help you." That night, the police went to Thomas's house. They arrested him, and for the first time in 14 years, Priscilla slept without fear. But the fight wasn't over, not even close. When the news broke, Priscilla's extended family was torn apart. Some believed her, some didn't. Her grandmother, Thomas's wife, refused to accept it. She called Priscilla a liar, said she was trying to destroy the family, said she was ungrateful after everything Thomas had done for her. Those words cut deeper than any abuse. Priscilla had expected Thomas to deny it, but she hadn't expected her own family to turn against her. Some cousins stopped speaking to her. Some aunts and uncles took sides. The family she had left was crumbling, and she felt like it was all her fault. But Angela reminded her over and over again, "You are not responsible for other people's reactions. You are only responsible for your truth." The case went to trial. Priscilla had to sit in a courtroom and tell her story all over again, this time in front of strangers, in front of a jury, in front of Thomas. He sat there dressed in a suit, looking frail and old, like a harmless grandfather. It made her sick. His lawyer tried to paint her as a troubled girl, someone who was making up stories for attention. They brought up her suicide attempt, her cutting, her poor grades, as if her pain was proof that she was lying. But the prosecutor fought back. He brought in Dr. Whitman, Angela, medical records, evidence. He showed the jury that Priscilla's pain wasn't proof of dishonesty. It was proof of survival. And when the verdict came, when the jury found Thomas guilty on multiple counts of sexual abuse and rape, Priscilla felt something she hadn't felt in years. Relief, not happiness, not closure, just relief. Because finally someone believed her. Finally the truth was out. Thomas was sentenced to 25 years in prison. He would be in his 90s by the time he got out, if he got out at all. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair, looked directly at Thomas and said, "You betrayed the trust of a child who had already lost everything. You stole her innocence, her childhood, her sense of safety. There is no greater betrayal than that, and you will spend the rest of your life paying for it." Priscilla sat in the courtroom, tears streaming down her face. Not tears of sadness, tears of something she couldn't quite name. Maybe it was relief, maybe it was grief, maybe it was the beginning of healing. She didn't know. But for the first time in her life, she felt like she could breathe. Healing wasn't linear. Priscilla learned that quickly. There were days when she felt strong, when she could talk about what happened without breaking down, and there were days when she couldn't get out of bed, when the memories hit her like a freight train, when she felt like she was right back in that room, helpless and small. But she kept going. She continued therapy. She joined a support group for survivors of childhood sexual abuse. She met other women who understood, who had lived through similar horrors, who didn't look at her with pity, but with recognition. She wasn't alone. And that made all the difference. She went back to school. She changed her major to social work. She wanted to help other survivors, to be the person she wished she'd had when she was 8 years old. She started writing, journaling her experiences, her thoughts, her pain. And slowly, those journals turned into essays, and those essays turned into a blog, and that blog reached people all over the world. People who needed to hear that they weren't alone. People who needed to hear that it wasn't their fault. People who needed to hear that healing was possible. Priscilla wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. She was fighting. She was finding her voice. So, let me ask you something. How do you feel about Priscilla's story? Does it make you angry? Does it break your heart? Does it make you think about the people in your own life who might be suffering in silence? Because the truth is, abuse doesn't always come from strangers. Most of the time, it comes from someone the victim knows, someone they trust, someone they love. It could be a parent, a coach, a teacher, a neighbor, a grandfather. And most of the time, the victim doesn't speak up, not because they don't want to, but because they're scared. Because they've been manipulated into believing that it's their fault, that no one will believe them, that speaking up will destroy everything. But silence never protects the victim. It only protects the abuser. If you or anyone you know feels unsafe, please speak up. Tell someone. Call a hotline. Reach out for help. You are not alone. You are not to blame, and you deserve to be free. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. If this story touched you, please share it. Your share could help someone break free from silence. Priscilla's voice was once broken, but now it speaks for others. And maybe, just maybe, her story can help someone else find theirs. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And thank you for standing with survivors.